The wind, a cornered beast, tore at the rotting fascias of number 17 Cedar Hill, its shriek a New Year's Eve dirge for a house devoid of celebration. Inside, the air was a viscous stew of stale cigarette smoke, cheap whiskey, and palpable dread. 10-year-old Ellie, small for her age, flattened herself against the cracked plaster of her bedroom wall, a human tremor detector registering every volcanic rumble from her stepfather. Each heavy thud of Travis's work boots on the hallway linoleum was a countdown to her own personal apocalypse. Tonight, the air vibrated with a terrifying new frequency. "Think you can scurry away from me, you little roach?" Travis's voice, thick and distorted by an afternoon's assault on a bottle of Black Stag, clawed through the thin door. The acrid scent of him, stale beer, unwashed sweat, and a simmering, almost tangible fury, seeped under the doorframe like a noxious gas. Ellie squeezed her eyes shut, heart hammering like a trapped bird against her ribs. It had been the story tin. Dad's old battered biscuit tin, embossed with faded sailing ships, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the linen closet. A space Travis had explicitly, violently forbidden her to approach. A fragment of memory. Her father's warm chuckle. "When the shadows get too long, Ellie Bean, my stories are in here shining a light for you," had been an irresistible lure. He'd found her crouched there, tin open, his face darkening like a thunderhead. He'd snatched the tin, not even looking inside, and thrown it with such force that the clasp had broken, scattering a few handwritten pages across the grimy floor. He'd backhanded her then, a casual, brutal swipe that sent her sprawling, her ear ringing. That had been an hour ago. The ensuing silence had been worse than the shouting. Now the bedroom door didn't splinter. It exploded inwards, ripped from its protesting hinges by a single demonic heave. Travis filled the doorway, a hulking, malevolent silhouette against the sickly yellow light of the hall. His face was a gargoyle's mask of contorted rage. Eyes, bloodshot, pupils pinpricked. He was holding a length of copper pipe he'd been fixing under the sink earlier. "I told you," he bellowed, his voice cracking. He lunged not at her, but at the fragile wall beside her head. The pipe slammed into the plaster with a sickening thud, missing her by inches, but showering her with stinging dust and the acrid smell of pulverized lath. "I told you never ever go near my things. That goddamn deadbeat father of yours left nothing but trouble and fairy tales." His hand, a greasy claw, shot out and clamped around her upper arm, fingers digging into her bicep with the crushing force of a vice. The pain was a blinding white flare, but it was the chillingly detached, almost predatory glint in his eyes that turned her blood to slush. This wasn't just whiskey-fueled anger. It was a cold, calculated enjoyment of her terror. He was savoring this. "Please, Travis, I wanted to read Dad's stories." She whimpered words strangled by the vice of fear around her throat. The corner of one of the scattered pages bearing her father's familiar cursive lay near her foot. He laughed, a harsh, guttural bark that held no humor. "Stories. You were looking for something to sell, you little sneak, just like him, always looking for an easy score." He dragged her from the room, her bare feet snagging on the gritty, uneven floorboards. Her worn-out sneakers, their soles detached in places, lay like abandoned husks by the door. Down the narrow, unlit stairs, they stumbled, Ellie, a limp puppet in his merciless grip, her shoulder cracking against the splintered banister with each jarring descent. The neighborhood, shrouded in the false tranquility of New Year's Eve preparations, seemed to hold its collective breath. Behind closed curtains, she imagined eyes watching, judging, then turning away. No doors creaked open. No indignant voices challenged the night. Only the keening wind and Ellie's choked, desperate gasps. He wrenched her through the squalid kitchen past her mother, Nancy, who stood petrified, a dish rag twisted into a knot in her trembling hands. Her face, usually pale, was a hollow ash-gray mask of abject fear. Nancy's eyes, wide-haunted, met Ellie's for a torturous microsecond, a silent scream of shared helplessness before darting away to fixate on a festering stain on the peeling linoleum. Her shadow, elongated and quivering in the dim bulb's miserable glow, was a grotesque parody of the mother who had once sung her lullabies about brave knights and sparkling stars, now a mute, broken statue carved from terror. Travis, still gripping Ellie's arm with bruising force, fumbled with the front door latch. The rusted hinges shrieked like souls in torment as he yanked it open, and with a savage roar hurled Ellie onto the freezing concrete porch. The impact was brutal, slamming into her knees and elbows, the raw, abrasive shock stealing her breath. A sharp pain shot through her right wrist as she tried to break her fall. Out! Get out on the damned street where you belong, you little curse! Travis bellowed, spittle flecking her face in the icy wind. Maybe the new year will finally send a garbage truck to collect you. He lunged, grabbing a handful of her tangled hair, yanking her head back with sickening force. You're a viper, just like your father. Always digging, always stirring up what's best left buried. His face, a grotesque landscape of rage, was inches from hers, his breath a potent cocktail of cheap whiskey and decay. Ellie tasted blood, warm and metallic, where her lip had split against her teeth. The pain was a dull, insistent throb, eclipsed by the crushing, absolute weight of her abandonment. Her gaze darted desperately to the windows across the street. Dark, unforgiving, indifferent squares. The cold silence from the neighbors was a sharper, more insidious cruelty than the frigid flagstones beneath her battered body. Travis whirled on Nancy, who had followed a wraith-like presence framed in the doorway. What the hell are you gawking at, you useless cow? You want to join her? Get your worthless hide out here. 2 for the price of 1 out in the freezing dark. That what you want? Nancy flinched, as if struck, shrinking further back. Her knuckles stark white as she clutched the doorframe. Not a syllable. Not a shield. Not a mother. Just a hollow void where courage and love had been systematically exterminated. It was then, as Travis raised his hand again, perhaps to strike Ellie or to emphasize his threat to Nancy, his face contorted in a sneer of absolute power, that the world outside their private hell abruptly fractured. Blinding, piercing headlights knifed through the oppressive gloom, pinning them like specimens in an accusatory, unblinking glare. A sleek, black SUV, its engine, a low, almost subsonic purr, had materialized at the curb, as if summoned from the deepest recesses of the storm-racked night. The driver's door opened with a quiet, expensive click. A man emerged, stepping into the harsh cone of light, like an archangel of vengeance sculpted from shadows and steel. A long charcoal gray cashmere coat collar, artfully upturned, shielded him from the biting wind that offered Ellie no such compassion. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, his face stern, etched with lines that spoke of unwavering authority rather than mere chronology. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, swept over the brutal tableau on the porch of number 17, missing no detail from Ellie's bleeding lip to Travis's raised hand. Ethan Whitaker, enigmatic head of the state's largest and most influential investment consortium, Whitaker Holdings. A name whispered in the rarefied circles of power and finance, a man rarely seen in public, but whose influence was an undeniable force. He moved with an unhurried panther-like grace, his expensive Italian leather shoes making almost no sound on the frost-slicked pavement. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply stood in the middle of the desolate street, the SUV's high beams transforming the porch into a stage for a horror play. Enough. The word was not loud, but it possessed the incisive cut of a surgeon's scalpel, deep resonance slicing through Travis's enraged tirade and the wail of the wind. It resonated in the sudden, profound silence, heavier and more commanding than any roar. Travis caught mid-ran arm, still raised, blinked stupidly into the blinding light. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your goddamn business. Piss off before you get hurt." Ethan Whitaker took a single measured step forward, his icy gaze unwavering. "It becomes my business." He stated, his voice a low, dangerous baritone. "When I witness a child being systematically brutalized." Travis, momentarily emboldened by the dregs of whiskey and a lifetime spent preying on those weaker than himself, puffed out his chest, taking a belligerent step towards the edge of the porch. "This is my house, my rules, my stepdaughter. I'll discipline her how I damn well see fit." He gestured aggressively with a fist. "Now you best get lost, fancy pants, before I make you." Ethan's expression remained impassive, but a sliver of something cold and hard entered his eyes. "Discipline?" He questioned, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Or are you simply deriving pleasure from terrorizing a defenseless child?" He then raised his phone, its screen glowing brightly in the darkness. "My name is Ethan Whitaker. If that name means nothing to your undoubtedly limited intellect, perhaps this will. I am currently recording this entire charming domestic scene. And I retain an entire legal department that positively revels in pursuing cases of aggravated assault and child endangerment, particularly against repeat offenders." The mention of recording of lawyers, and most pointedly of his full name, finally pierced Travis's alcohol-saturated bravado. He visibly faltered, his bluster deflating like a punctured tire. Nancy, still cowering by the door, let out a small choked gasp. But Travis, cornered, humiliated, and desperate, wasn't entirely neutralized. Primal rage, ugly and venomous, resurfaced. He saw Ellie, small and broken, on the unforgiving porch, the catalyst for his public shaming. With a guttural snarl, he lunged not for Ethan, but back towards Ellie. His hand snatching a rotten, jagged piece of a broken porch chair, its edge splintered and sharp as a shard of glass. "You little witch. This is all your fault." He screamed, his face a mask of pure hatred. Before the splintered wood could connect with Ellie's cowering form, Ethan moved with a speed that was utterly astounding for a man his size and apparent profession. He was on the porch in two fluid, economical strides, his arm intercepting Travis's, deflecting the vicious downward thrust. The jagged wood scraped violently against Ethan's expensive coat sleeve, tearing the fine cashmere, and a thin crimson line blossomed instantly on his forearm where the fabric had ridden up. Ethan didn't so much as flinch, his grip on Travis's wrist locking like a steel trap. There was an audible pop as a small bone in Travis's wrist likely gave way. "I believe," Ethan enunciated each word with chilling, precise deliberation, his face now inches from Travis's, his eyes like chips of frozen obsidian. "I instructed you that it was enough." There was something in his stance, a coiled, predatory stillness, a palpable aura of disciplined, lethal strength, far transcending that of a mere businessman, that made Travis's eyes widen with a sudden, shocking flicker of genuine primal fear. He saw not just a wealthy, influential man, but a profoundly dangerous one. Travis let out a small, gurgling whimper. Travis's arm went limp, the fight draining out of him, as if a plug had been pulled. He dropped the piece of jagged wood as if it had seared his flesh. All the aggression evaporated, replaced by a sullen, resentful terror. He stumbled back, clutching his injured wrist, muttering incoherent curses, the neighborhood bully suddenly and utterly unmanned. Ellie, who had squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable agony of the blow, stared up at Ethan. Not just at the man who had spoken with such authority, but at the man who had acted, who had physically interposed himself between her and the jagged weapon, between her and the venomous rage. He had bled for her, a complete stranger. A trickle of blood snaked down Ethan's forearm, staining the pristine white cuff of his shirt. Ethan released Travis's wrist with a contemptuous shove. his eyes still locked on the now cowering brute, were implacable. "Go inside. Now." Travis, all bravado extinguished, practically scuttled back into the oppressive gloom of number 17, slamming the door behind him. A moment later, the few dim lights within the house winked out, plunging it into an ashamed, guilty darkness. Nancy remained a spectral silhouette in the doorway for a heartbeat longer, her face an unreadable cipher of shock and perhaps a dawning, terrifying hope, before she too vanished, the door clicking shut with a soft, funereal finality. Ethan turned to Ellie, his severe expression softening almost imperceptibly. He flexed his hand, a brief, almost imperceptible grimace touching his lips as he glanced at the torn sleeve and the blood welling steadily from the gash on his forearm. He dismissed it with a shake of his head, crouching down slowly to her level. The scent of expensive cologne sandalwood and something clean momentarily displaced the stench of fear and decay. "Are you all right, child?" Ellie could only nod, hot, silent tears finally breaking free, carving pathways through the grime on her cheeks. In the chaos, she'd instinctively snatched her story tin. It lay beside her on the cold concrete, its broken clasp a mute testament to Travis's fury. I wasn't trying to steal. Just the stories. Dad's stories. In my story tin." She whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. Her split lip throbbed. "I believe you," Ethan said, his voice now surprisingly gentle. A stark, almost shocking contrast to the tempered steel it had held only moments before. He looked at her torn, thin sweater, her bare, bruised feet, the livid scrapes on her knees, already turning an angry purple. His gaze lingered for a moment on her split lip. "What is your name?" "Ellie." She managed her voice, a ragged whisper, barely audible above the mournful sigh of the wind. He's not my real father. My dad. My real dad's gone. He died when I was 8. The distant, premature pop, pop, pop of celebratory fireworks punctuated her desolate words, a cruel, mocking counterpoint to the profound misery on the porch of number 17. Here, under the accusatory glare of the SUV's headlights, there were no joyous lights, no celebratory laughter, only a small, shivering girl, a forgotten smear of pain on the vast, indifferent canvas of the New Year's Eve night. Ethan's eyes took in her threadbare shoes again, peeking out from under her. "Get in the car, Ellie." It wasn't a request. It was a calm, undeniable directive. She hesitated, a lifetime of ingrained mistrust and fear warring violently with the undeniable, irrefutable evidence of his swift, decisive protection. I don't know who you are, sir." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips. "Good. A healthy dose of suspicion is a survivor's hallmark. My name is Ethan Whitaker." He opened the passenger door of the SUV, the interior lights spilling out, revealing plush leather seats. But part of surviving, Ellie, is learning to distinguish those who intend you harm from those who offer a genuine hand. Right now you need to be warm, and you urgently need to be safe. Ellie looked deep into his eyes. They weren't saccharine kind. They were not the eyes of a casual Good Samaritan. They were the eyes of a man who had witnessed far too much of the world's pervasive ugliness and had for this one night at least grown weary of its unchecked reign. Slowly clutching her precious story tin and a tattered beloved brown teddy bear named Pickle, the sole treasured relic from her 7th birthday, the last happy birthday before her world had imploded. She limped towards the car and got in. Her small hands trembled violently, but not just from the bitter cold. Ethan closed her door gently, then walked around to the driver's side, his movements economical, precise, almost pantherine. He slid behind the wheel, his glance at his bleeding forearm, brief and utterly dismissive. The powerful engine hummed back to vibrant life, a resonant thrum that promised not just warmth, but escape. As the SUV pulled away smoothly from the curb, Number 17 Cedar Hill receded into the swallowing darkness, a black hole of despair and violence that had for 10 excruciating years been her only twisted definition of home. Ellie didn't look back. The road leading away from the edge of town was deserted, the SUV's headlights carving a bright, unwavering path through silent, snow-dusted trees that stood like ghostly, mournful sentinels. Soon, an imposing set of wrought iron gates, bearing a simple, elegant W, swung open automatically, soundlessly, revealing a long, winding, tree-lined drive. At its end, nestled amidst meticulously manicured grounds, stood a mansion. White-painted stone, sprawling undeniably grand, yet exuding a profound, almost melancholic stillness, as if it were holding its breath. Ethan switched off the engine in a cavernous, heated garage. He led Ellie inside, not through a grand main entrance, but a side door into a warm mudroom. Soft, recessed yellow light spilled onto polished mahogany floors, illuminating a vast, cathedral-ceilinged living room. A majestic, unlit stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. Yet an emptiness, a palpable, resonant silence clung to the undeniable grandeur. No television blared, no joyful laughter echoed, no familiar voices called out. It was a house filled with exquisite, beautiful objects that seemed to be patiently waiting for memories that had long since departed or perhaps had never been made. "Come in." Ethan said, his voice, even though a note of weariness now laced it. He gestured towards a small, cozy room off the main hallway, once perhaps a compact study or a morning room, now clearly repurposed into a child's temporary sanctuary. It wasn't festooned with garish, childish colors, but held a clean, freshly made single bed, a small antique mahogany wardrobe, and a few exquisitely crafted, antique-looking stuffed animals arranged on a high shelf, watching with knowing glass button eyes. He pointed to a neatly folded pair of soft flannel pajamas and a plush bathrobe laid out on the bed. "These belong to Eleanor, my daughter." His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "They might be a little large for you. The bathroom is through there to your left. Plenty of hot water, soap, clean towels. Take your time." Ellie looked up, her gaze questioning silently, asking the unspoken. "You can certainly take your bear pickle with you." He added, his gaze falling for a moment on her fierce, protective grip on the worn toy. She nodded mutely, clutching Pickle as if he were a lifeline to a saner world. The bathroom was a small haven of warm steam and pristine cream-colored tiles. For a long, precious moment, Ellie just stood before the running water, letting the luxurious, unhurried warmth envelop her. It was an alien sensation. Then slowly, gingerly, she undressed, wincing as the fabric pulled at her scrapes. The dirt and grime of her old wretched life swirled down the drain with the warm water. She sat in the deep porcelain tub, Pickle wrapped carefully in a fluffy white towel beside her on a small stool, and simply breathed. A deep, shuddering, cleansing breath, the first in what felt like an eternity, that wasn't laced with the metallic tang of fear. When Ellie finally emerged, hair damp and fragrant with almond-scented shampoo, the borrowed pajamas, soft and comforting against her clean skin, pooling generously around her ankles, the unexpected aroma of something warm and deeply savory drew her hesitantly towards the kitchen. It was enormous, modern, professional-grade stainless steel gleaming under soft lights. Yet it possessed a surprisingly lived-in, welcoming feel. Ethan, his injured forearm now expertly bandaged, stood at a large restaurant-quality stove stirring a bubbling pot. He'd shed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, looking less like a billionaire tycoon and more like a tired but capable man making a late supper. knowing how to make a truly good soup," he said, not looking at her, his voice resonating quietly in the spacious room, "is an essential survival skill. Warms the stomach, easy to digest. Cures a multitude of unspoken, invisible ailments." Ellie hovered uncertainly in the doorway, Pickle still held close like a talisman. "Are you a vegetarian, Ellie?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "Any food allergies I should be aware of?" "No, sir." "Then eat." He ladled a rich, golden chicken soup fragrant with thyme, rosemary, and myriad vegetables into a heavy porcelain bowl. He placed it along with a thick slice of crusty bread on a massive weathered oak table that looked centuries old. "There are generally two kinds of hunger in this world, Ellie. There is stomach hunger and there is heart hunger. The second, regrettably, takes significantly longer to heal. Tonight, we shall begin with the first." She sat at the vast table, her feet dangling high above the polished flagstone floor. The bowl of soup, steaming and golden, blurred her vision as fresh tears welled. The first spoonful was an explosion of warmth and flavor, pure, unadulterated heaven. Then the second and the third. No one spoke, only the quiet, rhythmic clink of her spoon against the fine porcelain. 15 minutes later, the bowl was scraped clean. Ellie didn't dare ask for more, but she hugged Pickle a little tighter, as if sharing the profound comfort of the meal. Ethan observed her, his astute eyes briefly falling on a loose, dangling button on Pickle's chest before meeting hers. "You always hug him so very tightly." "His name is Pickle," she said softly, her voice stronger now. "My dad gave him to me. For my 7th birthday. Mum said Dad had to borrow money for him. He'd lost his job at the shipyard then." Her voice faltered, the memory a sudden sharp ache. Travis always threatened he'd throw Pickle in the incinerator if I wasn't good enough. Or quiet enough. Something flickered deep in Ethan's glacial eyes. A brief, intense flare of controlled, white-hot anger so quickly doused it was almost imperceptible. He rose, moving with a quiet grace to the immense living room sofa, gesturing for her to follow. Ellie perched hesitantly on the very edge of a nearby overstuffed armchair. Pickle nestled on her lap. After a long, comfortable silence, punctuated only by the distant sigh of the wind, outside the double-glazed windows, she found her voice again. "Mr. Whitaker, your daughter, Eleanor. Why isn't she here?" Ethan paused, his gaze distant, unseeing, drifting towards a closed dark wood door at the far end of the upstairs gallery hallway. "She's in a very, very far away place, Ellie," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough. Ellie nodded slowly, her child's mind processing this in the only way it knew how. "Like my dad. Mum always used to say Dad was in a very, very far away place now." A muscle twitched almost invisibly in Ethan's lean jaw. He didn't correct her, didn't offer any further elaboration, just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He reached over, his movement slow, almost hesitant, and gently smoothed a stray strand of damp hair from her forehead. It was a silent acknowledgement of a shared, profound, unspoken sorrow. "Do you miss her very much?" Ellie's voice was small, fragile. "Like I miss my dad every single day." The question, artless yet extraordinarily profound, landed with quiet force in the stillness of the vast room. He looked at the small, bruised girl before him, her eyes shadowed with a weariness far too old for her tender years. "Every single day, Ellie," he said, his voice soft, yet imbued with an unshakable, immutable certainty. "Especially on the days I consciously try not to. People sometimes think it hurts too much to talk about them." Ellie mused, her gaze fixed on Pickle's familiar stitched smile. "But I think it hurts much, much more when everyone just pretends they never even existed at all." Ethan understood that sentiment more than she could possibly imagine. Your room for tonight is the guest suite at the end of the hall second floor. It may feel a little cool despite the heating. He handed her a thick, incredibly soft, cream-colored cashmere blanket from the back of the sofa. I suspect even this house holds its share of cold spots. Can Pickle sleep in the bed with me? Of course. You should always put him where you feel safest. That night, in the quiet, unfamiliar opulence of the guest room, Ellie found a small antique sewing kit in a drawer of the bedside table. With painstaking care, her small fingers clumsy but earnest, she meticulously sewed Pickle's loose button back onto his chest. Her stitches were uneven, but they were strong. Downstairs in the vast, silent living room, Ethan sat by the slowly dying embers of a fire he'd lit earlier. A heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid untouched on the table beside him. A small silver-framed photograph was clutched in his hand. A girl with bright, fiercely intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark brown hair frozen in a moment of laughter. Eleanor. He'd seen a fleeting shadow of that same fierce protective love in Ellie's gaze, as she had clutched her worn, tattered bear, her fragile, tangible link to a time of unconditional love and safety. Sometimes he mused his own heart, a hollow ache. True healing begins not with sophisticated medicine or complex therapies, but with a simple bowl of warm soup, a carefully mended toy, and the profound sanctuary of a place where no one snatches your most precious treasures away. He thought of the raw gash on his forearm, the dull throb a counterpoint to the deeper ache within. Some things were worth the pain. Dawn crept into the room, painting pale ethereal streaks across the polished wooden floor. Ethan was already awake, dressed in casual slacks and a dark sweater, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted brioche drifting from the kitchen. 2 porcelain cups were set on the massive oak table. Ellie appeared in the doorway, the borrowed pajamas trailing like a royal train, Pickle tucked securely under her arm. May I please have some water?" she asked, her voice a bare, hesitant whisper. Without a word, Ethan rose, retrieved a clean glass from a cabinet, filled it with chilled water from the refrigerator dispenser, and placed it gently before her empty setting. "Here, Ellie. In this house, you never need to ask permission to drink water, or to simply be." Unexpected tears welled hot and silent as she drank the simple, unasked-for kindness overwhelming her. Ethan picked up a financial newspaper, but his gaze was steady, not unkind, over the top of it. "Has anyone, Ellie, ever taken the time to tell you," he asked, his voice quiet but clear, "that you intrinsically deserve to be loved, to be cherished, and to be safe simply for existing?" The words, devoid of pity or sentimentality, landed like a soothing balm on old, festering wounds. Ellie didn't answer, couldn't answer, but a small, choked sob escaped her lips. Ethan merely slid a box of tissues across the smooth oak surface towards her. "Crying is an action too, Ellie," he said, his eyes returning to his paper. "Sometimes it's the bravest and most necessary action of all." After a mostly silent breakfast, Ethan made a call, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Thomas, it's Ethan. I require your immediate assistance. Child Protective Services. A girl 10 years old, Eleanor. Ellie Vance. Stepfather Travis M. Garner, resident at 17 Cedar Hill. I have irrefutable video evidence of extreme abuse." A pause, then Thomas's voice, audible even from the phone, grim and professional. "How bad is it, Ethan?" "Bad enough to warrant my direct intervention. He was physically assaulting her on their porch, dragged her by the hair, armed himself with a piece of wood. I intervened. Sustained this in the process." Ethan glanced at the neatly bandaged cut on his forearm. He omitted Travis's shattered wrist. That would be for the police report. A sharp, audible intake of breath from the other end. Physical assault on you as well, Ethan. Are you absolutely certain you want to open this particular Pandora's box testifying court appearances the media if they get wind of it? Do you recall Eleanor Thomas? Ethan's voice was dangerously soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried an undeniable weight. Do you remember the look in her eyes when she was frightened? I saw that exact same look again last night. I couldn't save Eleanor from her fate, from the randomness of that event. But I can and I will do the right thing for this child. His voice hardened. And find out exactly what that bastard Garner knows about certain historical incidents at the shipyard. Frank Vance worked there too. His death was ruled an accident. I'm beginning to wonder. I'll get the official paperwork initiated immediately. Thomas said, his voice now imbued with a new steely resolve. And I'll start a deep dive into Garner and Frank Vance's employment records at the old Marine terminal. Anything specific I should look for? Look for ghosts, Thomas, and shadows. Later that morning, Ethan found Ellie on a secluded stone bench in the vast, frost-covered gardens, gently rocking Pickle. Her face pale but composed. He sat beside her, not too close. May I see him? Ethan asked, gesturing almost shyly towards the bear. Ellie, after a moment's hesitation, handed Pickle over. Ethan examined the newly sewn button, and then from his pocket, he produced a small, exquisite leather-bound sewing kit, far finer than the one in Ellie's room. With surprising, almost shocking deftness for such large masculine hands, he began to meticulously reinforce the stitching around Pickle's recently reattached button, his stitches small even and incredibly strong. You know how to sew? Ellie asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of surprise and awe. Eleanor, he said, his voice carefully neutral, had a rather adventurous rabbit named Persephone. Persephone endured numerous perilous escapades and consequently required frequent, intricate repairs. He paused, his fingers still moving with practiced precision. Eleanor was 9 when we lost her. A catastrophic car accident, a hit and run. They never found the driver or the vehicle. His voice was utterly flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. Yet it resonated with a grief so profound, it was almost a physical presence in the cold morning air. I'm so very sorry. Ellie whispered, her own small losses paling in comparison, yet a chord of shared sorrow vibrated between them. It is permissible to be sorry, Ellie, Ethan said, tying off a thread with a neat, invisible knot. It's what we do with that sorrow that defines us. People I've found only truly die when we cease to speak their names. And perhaps more importantly, when we stop fighting for the principles and the justice they would have championed. He handed Pickle back the button, now triply indestructibly secure. There, Pickle is stronger now, ready for new adventures. Ellie hugged the bear, a small, genuine, unfiltered smile, the first Ethan had seen, momentarily illuminating her bruised face. It was a fragile, tentative spark, but a spark nonetheless. That evening in her temporary room, Ellie hesitantly opened her father's story tin. The broken clasp annoyed her. Inside, nestled amongst a dozen or so folded handwritten stories, tales of brave sea captains, magical islands, and talking animals, was a thick yellowed envelope she hadn't seen before, tucked beneath a false bottom she hadn't known existed. It was addressed simply to Travis M. Garner, in her father's unmistakable, elegant handwriting, dated nearly 3 years prior, shortly before his accident. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the single crisp sheet of paper. Travis. It began, the ink slightly faded, but perfectly legible. Regarding that unfortunate incident down at the Hudson Bay shipping terminal, specifically the matter of the significantly missing inventory of high-value electronics from Dock 7 Bay 3, I've kept my silence as per our rather one-sided agreement. I've taken the fall, the accusations, the termination, the stain on my reputation. But you owe me, Garner. You owe me far more than just the money you skimmed. You owe me for my silence, for my ruined career, for the fact I didn't go to the Port Authority police then. You thought I was a fool. Perhaps I was for trusting a snake like you. One day, Travis, when you least expect it, I might just decide to come and collect what's mine. And it won't just be about the money. Don't you ever forget that. Mark my words. Frank Vance, Ellie's dad. Beneath the signature, almost as an afterthought, was a scrawled note. P.S. Kept a little insurance. Doc Manifest Ledger page 117. Remember that, Travis, some interesting signatures there besides mine. Ellie frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration, the full implication beyond her immediate grasp, but the menace clear. Missing inventory, Hudson Bay Shipping Dock Manifest. She took the letter, her heart pounding with a nameless dread, and found Ethan in his study surrounded by glowing screens and stacks of documents. Ethan read the letter, his expression slowly hardening into a mask of granite. Thomas has already been conducting some preliminary discreet inquiries into Mr. Garner's employment history. Ellie. He said, his voice dangerously quiet. It appears he and your father worked together at Hudson Bay Shipping for a period of about 18 months, a long time ago. There was indeed significant trouble, a major theft of cargo. Your father, Frank, was the prime suspect. He lost his job, his reputation shattered, though no formal charges were ever brought due to insufficient evidence. Travis Garner, however, not only emerged entirely unscathed, but received a promotion and a substantial bonus shortly thereafter. He left the company 6 months later under mutually agreeable terms. Ellie's eyes widened, a cold, sickening realization dawning. You think, Travis, he stole those things, and he let them blame my dad. I think, Ellie, Ethan said, his voice measured and precise, that your father was, by all accounts, an honest, hard-working man. And I believe Mr. Travis Garner has a great many more things to answer for than simply his appalling treatment of you and your mother. He carefully placed the letter in a clear evidence sleeve. We will ensure Thomas and the authorities handle this new compelling piece of information with the utmost discretion and diligence. Your only focus right now needs to be on feeling safe, on healing, and on remembering how to be a child. The CPS meeting was a powder keg. Travis, accompanied by a smarmy, low-rent lawyer, was alternately slickly conciliatory and belligerently accusatory, attempting to paint Ellie as a disturbed, vindictive liar, and himself as a misunderstood, concerned stepfather. Nancy was a shattered wreck, barely able to speak her testimony, wavering between mumbled apologies and terrified glances at Travis. But Ethan's crystal-clear, damning video footage, combined with Thomas's calm, meticulous presentation of preliminary findings, including hospital records detailing Ethan's medically treated injury from the porch confrontation, described as defense against an armed assailant, corroborating his statement of Travis's extreme volatility and propensity for violence, plus the new letter hinting at a far darker history, painted an undeniable, devastating picture. The judge, a stern-faced woman with weary eyes, didn't hesitate. Temporary emergency custody was unequivocally awarded to Ethan Whitaker. Protective orders were issued against Travis for both Ellie and Nancy. Travis erupted, his face contorting into a mask of purple, vein-popping rage. You haven't heard the last of this Whitaker, you rich bastard, or you lying little brat. He snarled directly at Ellie, who flinched violently, instinctively shrinking into Ethan's protective side. He was forcibly removed from the courtroom by 2 bailiffs. Days bled into weeks, then a month. Martha, a gentle, silver-haired tutor with kind eyes and infinite patience, began to visit Ethan's mansion daily. Ellie, slowly, painstakingly, began to rediscover the world of words, relearning to read with fluency and to write with confidence. One rainy afternoon, Martha found Ellie weeping silently over her new pristine notebook. She'd managed to write P-I-C-K-L-E perfectly, then D-A-D. But the last letter had been smudged into an illegible blur by a large, solitary tear. "I'm so stupid," she hiccuped, her small body shaking. "I can't even write his name right." "No, my dear Ellie," Martha said softly, her hand gently resting on the girl's shoulder. "You are not stupid. You are remembering. And writing the name of someone you love, especially when it hurts, is the bravest, most important writing of all." Ethan, observing unseen from the doorway, felt a familiar pang, a sharp echo of his own cavernous grief. He discreetly saved a photograph on his phone of her first tear-stained attempt at writing Day 1, Learning to Live Again. Nancy appeared on Ethan's doorstep one blustery, sleet-lashed afternoon, drenched, disheveled, and utterly desperate. "My child." She sobbed, her face ravaged by tears and sleepless nights, when Ethan cautiously opened the door. "My Ellie, I was so wrong, so terribly, unforgivably wrong. Please, Mr. Whitaker, just let me tell her how profoundly sorry I am. Let me try to be a mother again." Ethan, after a moment's consideration, called Ellie. The girl descended the grand staircase slowly, her expression wary, guarded. She looked at her mother, the woman who had failed her so catastrophically, yet was undeniably, irrevocably her mother. Ellie didn't run to her. There were no hugs, no easy absolution. She simply turned, walked to the hall closet, retrieved a thick, dry towel, and handed it silently to Nancy. "Thank you, Ellie Bean." Nancy choked out, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ellie gave a single solemn nod, then quietly retreated upstairs, leaving her mother and Ethan in the echoing silence of the grand hall. Forgiveness was a distant, perhaps unattainable shore. But the first tentative step, ceasing to actively hate, had just perhaps been taken. Later that week, Ethan, after a long conversation with Ellie, facilitated a supervised visit. Nancy, raw and vulnerable, read Ellie a long, tearful letter confessing her crippling fear of Travis, her shame, her profound regret, and her desperate, all-consuming love for her daughter, reiterating that Ellie was never ever a burden, but her greatest treasure. That night, for the first time in years, Ellie slept without hugging Pickle quite so tightly against her chest. She was slowly, painfully learning that she had the power to decide who was allowed to stay in her life and on what terms. The critical call came on a wild, storm-lashed evening, when the wind howling like a banshee around the stone eaves of the mansion. Thomas, his voice sharp, urgent, crackling over the secure line. "Ethan, bad news, very bad. Travis Garner skipped bail. He's completely unhinged. A neighbor reported him ranting like a lunatic earlier today, something about Ellie, that damn tin box, and getting what's his. He knows about the letter your people submitted as evidence. He must have seen Ellie with the tin, or simply suspects you found it. He's paranoid and dangerous." Ethan felt a sliver of ice slide down his spine. "Lock down the entire estate, Thomas. Full perimeter security alert. I'm on my way back from the city office now. ETA 15 minutes, maybe less." But Travis was far closer and far more desperate than any of them knew. As Ethan's powerful car devoured the miles, his secure phone rang again. This time, a choked, panicked call from Martha, who had been staying late to help Ellie with a difficult school project. "Mr. Whitaker." "Oh, dear God, he's here, Travis. He smashed a window in the old conservatory wing." Ellie screamed. "I think she managed to hide. I heard her yell something about the old root cellar access panel. Oh God, I smell smoke and something else. Chemicals." The line went dead with a sickening crackle. When Ethan's car screeched up the long drive tires, spitting gravel, dense, acrid black smoke was already coiling malevolently from a downstairs wing of the mansion. The rarely used west wing, which housed an old disused laboratory, and several storage rooms dating back to his grandfather's eccentric hobbies. He burst through the reinforced kitchen door into a scene of incipient chaos. Martha, pale as death but seemingly unharmed, was huddled near the entryway cell phone, clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Ellie. He was raving. Dragged her towards the old lab suites. I think he's looking for that story tin. He started a fire, I think. Knocked over a shelf with old bottles near some curtains. Ethan, his tailored business suit and silk tie suddenly feeling like a ludicrous costume, plunged towards the west wing. The air grew thick, stinging, rapidly filling with greasy, choking smoke. Small, hungry flames were already licking greedily up the heavy velvet curtains at the far end of a long corridor. And then he saw him, Travis, wild-eyed, deranged, clutching Ellie's battered story tin in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other, a maniacal, triumphant grin twisting his smoke-stained face. Ellie was cowering behind a heavy, overturned steel laboratory bench, Pickle clutched protectively in her arms. The air was heavy, not just with smoke, but with the sharp, pungent odor of volatile chemicals. Several large, shattered carboys lay on the floor, their contents pooling ominously. "Looking for this Whitaker, you interfering bastard." Travis cackled, waving the tin like a trophy. All the secrets are out now, eh? That deadbeat Frank Vance wasn't quite so stupid after all, was he? This little box is my ticket out of here. Let her go, Travis, now. Ethan commanded, his eyes rapidly scanning the dangerously compromised environment, assessing a dozen horrific variables at once. Not a goddamn chance she's my insurance policy. Travis lunged, grabbing Ellie's arm, yanking her roughly towards him, away from the relative shelter of the bench. Pickle, dislodged by the sudden movement, tumbled from her grasp, landing perilously close to the edge of the rapidly spreading chemically fueled flames near the doorway. Pickle. No. Ellie screamed a sound of pure, undiluted anguish, trying desperately to wrench her arm free from Travis's brutal grip. In that fractured, terrifying instant, several things happened with breathtaking, nightmarish speed. The fire feeding on spilled solvents and old dry wooden shelving surged with a terrifying explosive whoosh, a blast of heat pushing them all back. Travis, momentarily distracted and blinded by the sudden violent inferno, involuntarily loosened his grip on Ellie's arm. Ethan saw his infinitesimal window of opportunity. He lunged not at Travis, but low and fast towards Ellie, scooping her slight, trembling form up into his arms like a precious, fragile bundle. "The bear, my pickle." Ellie cried, her voice hoarse, pointing with a trembling finger towards the encroaching wall of fire. With flames now alarmingly, searingly close, Ethan, shielding Ellie with the bulk of his body, reached out blindly with his free left hand into the shimmering convection-rippled heat, his fingers snatching Pickle from the very precipice of the inferno. A searing, almost unimaginable pain shot up his arm as his hand and forearm were engulfed in direct flame for a critical, agonizing second. He gritted his teeth against a scream, pulling his arm back, his tailored sleeve instantly smoking the sickeningly sweet, acrid smell of burned fabric and seared flesh, sharp and horrifying in the air. He shoved Ellie bodily towards the now partially flame-obscured doorway. "Go! Ellie, get out now." As Ellie scrambled frantically towards what she prayed was safety, Ethan, fighting waves of nausea and agonizing pain, turned to face Travis. The man was now looking utterly trapped, his face a mask of dawning, abject terror, as he stared at the uncontrolled chemical blaze he had unleashed. Flaming debris began to fall from the rapidly deteriorating ceiling. Ethan, ignoring the screaming agony in his left arm, grabbed a heavy bronze fire extinguisher from its wall mounting and, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, hurled it with all his might at the nearest reinforced window, shattering the thick glass. "Out, Travis, through there, if you want to live." Ethan choked out the smoke raw in his lungs. Travis, coughing, spluttering his eyes wide with terror, saw his only desperate chance of escape and scrambled like a panicked animal through the jagged broken window, disappearing into the night, just as the first high-pitched wail of approaching sirens pierced the storm. Ethan, after a last smoke-blinded desperate grope under the laboratory bench for Ellie's precious story tin. It had by some miracle been kicked further under away from the worst of the flames, fought his own agonizing way. Back through the swirling toxic smoke collapsing onto the cold, wet lawn, just as the first team of firefighters in full gear stormed the burning wing. His left hand and forearm were a grotesque, unrecognizable mess of angry red and blistered burns. Ellie, guided by a frantic Martha, rushed to his side, tears streaming down her smoke-grimed face, Pickle clutched tight against her chest. "You saved him," she sobbed, her small hand gently touching Pickle's singed fur to Ethan's smoke-blackened cheek. "You saved us all. Again." Ethan, gasping for breath, the world tilting crazily, managed a faint, ghastly approximation of a smile. "Some bears, Ellie. Some bears are definitely worth fighting for." He coughed a racking, painful sound. "The tin! Did you get the tin?" Ellie nodded, holding up the soot-covered but intact story tin. "It's safe, Mr. Whitaker. It's safe." Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over him before the darkness claimed him. The subsequent trial was swift and decisive. Travis Garner's litany of crimes, aggravated arson, reckless endangerment causing severe injury, kidnapping, multiple counts of child abuse, bail jumping, compounded by the damning evidence from Frank Vance's letter, which Thomas, with masterful legal acumen, presented not just as a record of past crimes, but as the undeniable motive for Travis's escalating fear. His desperate attempts to silence Ellie and his ultimate violent hatred towards her and her father's enduring memory sealed his fate. The old doc manifest ledger page detailing unauthorized shipments signed off by Travis was the final nail. He received a sentence that ensured he would likely never see the outside of a prison wall again. During Ethan's painful recovery from severe second- and third-degree burns, further truths emerged pieced together by Thomas's relentless investigation. Ethan, it turned out, hadn't always been a titan of finance. Years ago, he'd been a deep-cover operative for a specialized federal task force investigating organized crime rings operating out of major shipping ports, including Hudson Bay. Eleanor's death, while officially a hit-and-run, had occurred mere weeks after Ethan had been instrumental in dismantling a particularly vicious smuggling cartel. A cartel Travis Garner had been a low-level but ambitious operative for. While no direct link between Garner and Eleanor's death could ever be proven, the timing, Travis's known associates, and his pathological fear of exposure related to his past crimes cast a chilling new light on Ethan's almost preternatural, immediate, and fiercely protective intervention on that New Year's Eve. He hadn't just seen a child in danger. He'd seen the ghosts of his past and the echoes of his own loss, and perhaps a chance at a redemption he hadn't even known he was seeking. Nancy, throughout the entire agonizing ordeal, proved to be a quiet, unexpected source of strength. She visited Ethan regularly in the specialized burn unit, bringing small comforts and quiet, heartfelt apologies. More importantly, she was a constant, gentle presence for Ellie, patiently, humbly working to rebuild the shattered fragments of their mother-daughter bond, ensuring Ellie felt not her mother's guilt, but her deep, abiding remorse and her fragile, budding, hard-won strength. Recovery was a slow, arduous process. For Ethan's cruelly scarred hand and forearm, and for Ellie's deeply wounded heart. But they healed in their own ways together. Ethan, with Thomas's expert legal guidance, navigating the complex system, officially became Ellie's legal guardian. The lengthy formal adoption process was initiated. The heavily damaged west wing of the mansion was meticulously rebuilt, but the old laboratory was completely redesigned, transformed into a bright, airy art studio and library, filled with sunlight and plants, a tangible symbol of new beginnings and healing. Eleanor's room remained a quiet, untouched sanctuary. But now Ellie sometimes sat in there, curled in a comfortable armchair, reading Eleanor's treasured books, sharing her own burgeoning stories, with the silent, welcoming, somehow comforting space. 1 year later, New Year's Eve again. Snow fell in thick, soft, silent flakes, blanketing the world in a mantle of pure, pristine white, a blessing of peace. Inside Ethan's warm, fire-lit home, a profoundly different scene unfolded. Ethan, his left hand and forearm, extensively scarred, but remarkably functional. Thanks to months of grueling therapy, poured rich, dark, hot cocoa into 3 mugs. Nancy was there, a quiet, genuine smile gracing her lips, her eyes clear and calm. Ellie, noticeably taller, her gaze bright with a newfound quiet confidence that had once seemed an impossible dream, stood before them a beacon of resilience. She held her father's battered story tin, its broken clasp now carefully repaired by Ethan, with a tiny, intricate silver hinge. This year, she announced, her voice clear and steady, Pickle and I are starting a brand new project. She opened the tin. Inside, nestled amongst her father's faded, cherished, handwritten stories, were dozens of new, brightly colored, carefully folded notes. These are letters of hope and light, she explained. I wrote them. Martha helped me with the spelling and grammar. She picked one out, its paper a cheerful sunflower yellow. This one says, to any kid out there who feels lost in the dark, you are so much stronger and braver than you think. Even when you can't see it, someone out there cares. Please don't ever give up your light. I want Mr. Thomas to help us send them to children's shelters, to kids like I used to be. Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective pride that was almost painful in its intensity. The livid, puckered scars on his hand were a permanent, visceral reminder, not of agony, but of profound purpose. He had failed catastrophically to save Eleanor from a seemingly random, brutal act of violence. But he had, by choosing to act, by daring to utter that one simple declarative sentence, enough, saved Ellie. And in doing so, in ways he was only just beginning to comprehend, he had found a way to allow his own dormant, grieving father heart to begin tentatively to beat again, full and strong. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed the final resonant notes before midnight, they stepped out onto the wide, sheltered veranda. Fireworks, brilliant explosions of color and light, painted the velvety black canvas of the sky. Ellie stood between Ethan and Nancy, her hand instinctively seeking Ethan's. Last New Year's Eve, Ellie whispered, her gaze fixed on the ephemeral, incandescent beauty of the exploding colors. I was so alone, so scared out on that cold porch. She paused, then turned, her eyes shining. This year, Ethan put his good arm around her slim shoulders, drawing her close. Nancy gently took her other hand. This year, Ellie Bean? Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, you stand cherished, surrounded by family. And next year, and for every single year that follows, you will continue to stand even stronger, even taller, lighting the way for so many others who are still lost in the darkness. Ellie leaned into his side, Pickle tucked securely under her arm and the story tin held carefully in her free hand. The wind still howled its ancient song through the skeletal branches of the winter trees, but tonight it sang a different, more hopeful tune. A powerful, resonant anthem of courage, of extraordinary resilience, and of the incandescent, transformative power of one ordinary person, daring to stop to truly see and to unequivocally, irrevocably say, enough. The world, for one small bruised girl, and for the unexpectedly complex man who had chosen to save her, had indeed begun to change irrevocably and profoundly from that one pivotal sentence. And now Ellie Vance, survivor and beacon, was ready with all her heart to write her own bright, hopeful, powerful story. One letter, one word, one act of courage at a time.